We have been granted rare access to an Iraqi prison to meet a man who was caught offering kidneys for sale.
الموضوع كان كل شغلة إنسانية، يعني مثلا شخص مريض يريد بين الحياة والموت.
In the very beginning, I didn't feel guilty. I used to look at it as a humanitarian cause. But after a few months in this trade, I started questioning the morality, mostly because of the miserable conditions of the organ sellers. It broke my heart seeing young people doing this for money.
The majority of the illegal organ transplants do not take place in backstreet clinics. In fact, most of them take place in regular hospitals like this one. Surgeon Rafid Al-Aqili at this Baghdad Medical Center tells me it is legal to donate organs to a family member, and traffickers fake identity papers to make the seller and the buyer related on official documents.
It's true that in some cases we have doubts, but this is not enough to stop the surgery because people will die.
The illegal organ trade is a symbol of the increasing poverty and despair among millions of Iraqis. Many in the country are left with few options, including the difficult decision to sell a kidney.
That special report was from our correspondent in Iraq, Ahmed Mahan. You're listening to the BBC World Service. This is NewsHour with me, Razia Iqbal.
Distribution of the BBC World Service NewsHour is made possible by American Public Media with support from Progressive Insurance. Insurance for cars, home, boat, motorcycles, RVs, and commercial vehicles at 1-800-PROGRESSIVE and Progressive.com. And by Angie's List, local service offers and home improvement tips to help consumers achieve their project goals. Advice and member recommendations for hiring at angieslist.com.
Well, this is New York.
On the next Brian Lehrer Show, the New York primary results in excruciating detail. If you want to know how your neighborhood voted or your congressional district or which polling places have problems, this is the show for you.
We love New York.
Then we'll leave New York centrism behind, Connecticut, here they come, and put the results in context of the national race for the nominations. The Brian Lehrer Show, weekdays at 10 a.m. on WNYC.
WNYC is supported by the Ethics Institute at Kent Place School in Summit, New Jersey, a center for research, resources, and practice for students and parents on ethical issues relevant for 21st century leadership. Info and events at kentplace.org. Glen Mead, an independent trust company founded by the Pugh family to manage their charitable assets. More from Lee Miller at 212-328-7331.
You're listening to the BBC on WNYC. Good morning. I'm Satirius Johnson. President Obama is meeting with Saudi Arabia's King Salman in Riyadh. The visit comes against the backdrop of increasingly strained relations with the Saudis, who remain deeply opposed to Obama's outreach to Iran and skeptical of his approach to Syria. But at the start of the meeting, Obama said the U.S. is grateful to the Saudis for hosting the meeting and regional summit. King Salman said through a translator that the feeling between the Saudi people and the American people is mutual. A senior strategist for Democrat Bernie Sanders says the campaign will take a step back and then decide publicly what his intentions are. But strategist Ted Devine also says that Sanders is still making a contribution by bringing independents and young people into the process. Following Hillary Clinton's win in the New York Democratic primary yesterday, she now leads the delegate count 1,930 to 1,169, including superdelegates. Meanwhile, Republican presidential frontrunner Donald Trump has strengthened his own path during the general election with commanding victory in yesterday's New York primary on the Republican side. Today, Trump plans the campaign in Maryland, where he's holding a rally, and in Indiana. Former NYPD officer Peter Leong has been sentenced to 800 hours community service and 5 years probation for the shooting death of Akai Gurley. WNYC's Stephen Nesson was in the courtroom yesterday.
Judge Danny Chun followed the Brooklyn DA's recommendation that Leong not face prison time. But then, Chun reduced Leong's manslaughter charges, saying that Leong never intended to hurt anyone that night. The courtroom was silent. When Gurley's aunt stepped into the hallway afterward, she began screaming, "There's no justice." Her curses echoed off the walls. Outside, dozens of supporters for Gurley and Leong stood across the street from each other. Gurley's partner Kim Ballinger says she's shocked.
Why was the manslaughter reduced? It should have stopped.
A civil suit against Leong is still pending. For WNYC, I'm Stephen Nesson.
Going up to a sunny 65 today, tonight. It'll be clear with lows in the upper 40s. Right now it is sunny, 54 degrees at 9:33.
Coming up next, New York has its say in the ongoing presidential nomination race. But first, our daily look at the world of business. And you'll remember that huge story some 6 months ago and the kerfuffle it caused. The German car maker Volkswagen admitted falsifying emission tests in 11 million diesel cars sold all over the world. Well, it turns out that VW was far from alone, because today the Japanese car giant Mitsubishi has admitted falsifying fuel efficiency data in more than 600,000 vehicles. The company shares closed more than 15% down today over reports that it had cheated. Let's find out more from our business correspondent, Theo Leggett.
It's a serious manipulation, although unlike Volkswagen, it's not a deliberate attempt to use software to get around emissions regulations, which was what happened at Volkswagen. So in a sense, it's an order of magnitude less serious. But we live in the post-Volkswagen scandal world, and ever since that particular scandal broke, people within the industry and indeed among consumers have been looking at this and saying, well, if Volkswagen were doing it, mightn't other manufacturers have been involved in something similar? And can consumers actually rely on anything that we're told? And here we have another manufacturer which has been fiddling the figures. Not in the same way, it's more about making fuel consumption data appear more attractive than it should by using the wrong kind of tests and that kind of thing. But nevertheless, there has been some manipulation going on, and that looks very bad indeed.
And is that how it's come out, because of what happened with VW?
It came out, in fact, because a lot of the cars that are involved in this, and there are about 600,000 of them, all made for the Japanese market, were actually built by Mitsubishi on behalf of Nissan, another Japanese manufacturer. And when those cars were taken to Nissan, Nissan noticed a discrepancy in the fuel data that they were being given and asked Mitsubishi to check its figures. And it's from that it's come out that the tests were not being carried out properly. So it's another manufacturer, in effect, that has caused this all to come to light. Now, if you look at the cars involved, 600,000, as I said, a fair number, though not in the same league as the 11 million affected by the Volkswagen scandal. They're all cars which have been built for the Japanese market. So if you haven't heard of the EK Wagon and the EK Space, things like that, it's not altogether surprising. They're mini cars, miniature cars built for the Japanese market. But the reason it matters is that this is the first time since the Volkswagen scandal that a manufacturer, a significant manufacturer, though not among the biggest, has been caught effectively manipulating tests.
And clearly there was a consequence immediately. The company's shares closed considerably down.
Yes, they did. They were down 15% even before there'd been the press conference and all the details had come out. Now, Mitsubishi as a company has not been doing terribly well in recent years. It also has a history of scandal. In 2004, I think it was, the company got into trouble for covering up various problems with its cars. So another scandal is the last thing that Mitsubishi as a business actually needed. But more importantly, I think, this just reinvigorates the debate about whether or not the testing data that we're given by car manufacturers, who do most of the testing of new cars, can be relied upon.
That was the BBC's Theo Leggett. Lots more background on this story on our website, bbc.com. You're listening to NewsHour from the BBC. I'm Razia Iqbal. Now to the long race to the White House, and an important stepping stone took place overnight in New York. Primary season is far from over though, but there were crucial victories for the front runners, Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. The two of them may not be fully guaranteed to win their respective parties' nominations to run for the presidency, but they came closer. We'll talk about that in just a moment, but let's hear first from our correspondent in New York, Nick Bryant, who spent the night watching the results roll in.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the next President of the United States, Mr. Donald J. Trump.
Donald Trump came to the podium with Big Apple swagger, Frank Sinatra's great anthem, echoing around the atrium of the skyscraper that bears the billionaire's name.
Part of it, New York, New York. The people that know me the best, the people of New York, when they give us this kind of a vote, and it's just incredible.
The setting seemed apt, because this was a towering victory. He captured over 60% of his home state's vote. That gives him a big delegate haul and nudges him closer to the number he needs, 1,237, to secure the Republican presidential nomination.
We don't have much of a race anymore, based on what I'm seeing on television. Senator Cruz is just about mathematically eliminated. We're really rocking.
It is now almost mathematically impossible for Ted Cruz to win on the first ballot at the Republican convention. But that doesn't mean the race is over. The Texan senator is hoping to deprive Trump of the delegates he needs to win outright, to produce what's called a contested convention.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Hillary Clinton.
On the Democratic side, a homecoming win for New York's former Senator Hillary Clinton, which reinforced her front-runner status after a string of defeats to her rival Bernie Sanders.
Today, you proved once again there's no place like home.
With her husband and daughter Chelsea at her side, she laughed and smiled broadly, and no wonder. It's now almost impossible for Sanders to overhaul her lead.
Race for the Democratic nomination is in the home stretch, and victory is in sight.
This was the night of the front-runners. Donald Trump winning in the state of his birth, Hillary Clinton securing a comfortable victory in her adopted political home. It really was a case of New York, New York.
With a little help there from All Blue Eyes, Nick Bryant reporting. So where does this leave the race for each party's nomination? Radio host Lizzie O'Leary is in New York City.
I would say that it is not over yet, but a good deal closer. And certainly on the Democratic side, Hillary Clinton's lead is almost insurmountable for Bernie Sanders at this point. He would need to win 60% of the votes in the remaining contests to be able to reach the 2026 number that's required for the Democratic nomination. And at the risk of going down into a very long and confusing rabbit hole of American politics, this is a mathematically complicated system, certainly on both sides, but on the Democratic side, you have, of course, these superdelegates, these 712 superdelegates who have been pledged one way or another, some of them, and the Sanders campaign would like to try to flip some of them to their side, but I think that's quite an uphill battle for them.
And what about Donald Trump? He said time and again in the last few weeks about the consequences of a contested convention. Does the New York result mean that he can avoid that?
Not quite, but it puts him a lot closer. He won 89 delegates here in New York, and the magic number there is 1237. One of the things that's a bit confusing is the way the Republican Party rules lay this out. They sort of award delegates based on congressional districts. So he's a lot closer, and I think there's some sense among Republican power brokers that even if he has not reached 1237, if he comes to the convention with something over a 1,200 delegate threshold, that is really in his favor. One of the questions will be the contests going forward. He's tended to do well with the non-college educated. So we'll see. We have a number of Eastern Seaboard states coming up. I think Pennsylvania will probably look good for Trump, but some of the others may be a bit more of an open question.
Let's talk a little bit more about Donald Trump's style, which has clearly dominated the caucuses and the primaries. People are talking about a new restrained Donald Trump. He didn't speak for as long as he has in the aftermath of other victories. Have you noticed a shift?
I did notice that. I mean, of course, we're grading on a curve. If you had asked me, 2 election cycles ago when I was covering the Obama campaign, I never would have imagined that we would have the kind of rhetoric we have seen from Donald Trump. Although, last night, you were right, he struck a more subdued tone. They brought in Paul Manafort, who is a more experienced Republican operative than his campaign has seen before, and I think you can see a little bit of that influence. They are trying to consolidate their lead, and they are trying to appeal to some of the voters who have been put off by the rhetoric previous to this?
Quite aside from the rhetoric, it is really interesting to hear Donald Trump talking about the winning as a politician in New York. He says it has everything to do with what we've seen in towns and faces that have been weathered with trouble, joblessness and fear. It's what we learned looking at the factories that have been shuttered and the hearts that are closing. It's the kind of sentiment that you might have seen from somebody like Bernie Sanders, and yet it's Donald Trump who's talking about that kind of thing.
It is, and I think that sentiment, that sort of economic populism, if you will, has resonated for both of them. I think there's a big question here in the U.S. as people are looking at, say, the consequences of global trade agreements, what that means for employment. I think, though, Trump is being somewhat disingenuous when you look at how he won in New York. This is obviously a state where he is very well known, and it is important to note that the population of Republicans here is quite small. So even though numerically the numbers are quite small, the proportional delegate representation means that he gets those percentages. I was looking in my own electoral district in Brooklyn, around my neighborhood, he won 6 votes.
That was radio host Lizzie O'Leary speaking from New York City. And Team NewsHour will be going to Indiana for that primary. Tim Franks will be reporting from there. The European Union's Competition Commissioner has opened an anti-competitiveness case against the global internet giant Google. The central concern to regulators is the way Google's mobile phone operating system, Android, deals with applications. A sense in Brussels that Google's own apps, such as Gmail and Google Maps, get an unfair advantage over similar third-party apps. This case comes as one of Google's competitors, Yahoo, mulls over several bids from across the globe from companies wanting to buy its internet business. I've been finding out more from Windsor Holden. He's head of forecasting for the technology analysis firm Juniper Research. First to those concerns over Google's competitiveness.
At the heart of the matter here is their agreement with the handset vendors, the Mobile Application Distribution Agreement, the MADAs. Now, what that dictates is that if you want to put Google apps on a handset, you've really got to put all of Google's apps and services on there. The European Union feels that this is anti-competitive. It means that there's less scope for competing players to offer their apps and services on the phone, and it unfairly promotes Google's own products.
And what are we to make then of the beginning of this anti-competitiveness case against Google? Is it likely to be a very, very long-running case against the company?
One would imagine that these are merely the opening salvos of a fairly sustained battle. If you remember, a few years ago, Microsoft was fined, I think, $700 million or so for failing to promote a range of web browsers by the Commission. And again, that was a fairly lengthy procedure. Now, I would not expect resolution anytime in the immediate future, put it that way.
So this case against Google comes as its competitor, Yahoo, is considering several bids that it has received to buy the internet part of the company. What is it about these different suitors? Because there are quite a lot of potential buyers here that we're talking about. Verizon, Google itself, and the UK newspaper, the Daily Mail.
You've got several suitors here, all with different takes, if you like, on what would be the best fit in terms of the assets for those. So if you take Verizon, which is probably perceived as being in pole position to buy Yahoo, one of the key reasons behind the purchase here would be the acquisition of Yahoo's content products. Now, last year it closed the acquisition of AOL, which had a broadly similar portfolio of both content in terms of TechCrunch, Huffington Post, and advertising products to Yahoo. Now, by purchasing Yahoo, it would increase the scale of its content offering significantly. Now, in a market where the telcos are being increasingly stretched by players such as Netflix on the content side, if you as a telco can increase the scale of your digital content, that will only make you more attractive to consumers. Now, one of the players in the mix here is the Daily Mail, which is supposedly considering buying at least part of Yahoo in tandem with a number of private equity firms. Now, the Daily Mail itself has achieved a fairly strong presence within the States, although it should be, pointed out here that Yahoo still has a far higher reach in the US across its media verticals than Mail Online.
And what about the private equity firms that are interested in buying Yahoo? Are any of those likely to be successful?
There are at least 5 private equity firms that are understood to be in the mix here. Now, these include companies like Bain Capital, Apax Partners, Apollo Global. I suspect that what we will see come the second round of bidding is that we will see a number of these acting in concert, which has pretty much been okayed. But what is likely to happen is that we will see the assets, or the bones, if you like, of Yahoo picked over. You might well see the advertising network going in one direction, the content, the Yahoo News, the Yahoo Sports going in another.
So it's interesting, the separation inside the company that you're making, because Yahoo was a business that was in a pretty dire place just a few years ago.
It's still not in a great place. The value of its assets are probably greater than the whole put together. If you think about it, it's got a significant stake in Alibaba, which is the largest e-retailer in the world. It's got a stake in Yahoo Japan, which is still significant. But if you compare it, say, with Google, 10 years ago, these were companies of very roughly similar value, around about $5 billion or so. Now, over the past 10 years, Yahoo's revenues have flatlined, and in fact, last year it made a $4 billion loss, and Google is now worth 15 times the value of Yahoo.
Technology industry analyst Windsor Holden from Juniper Research on the big news today for both Google and Yahoo. Speaking of search engines, just time to remind you about our podcast. If you ever miss the programme live on air, choose a search engine, type in BBC NewsHour and follow the podcast instructions. You're listening to the BBC World Service. This is NewsHour with me, Razia Iqbal.
Distribution of the BBC NewsHour is supported by Citrix, creator of GoToMeeting, an online meeting solution designed to allow users to collaborate and present from anywhere. Information about being a meeting MVP is at gotomeeting.com, and by Wix.com. Every business needs a website, and with Wix.com, you can do it all by yourself by adding your images, videos, text, and social media. You can go to Wix.com and create your website today. Learn more at wix.com.
You're listening to the BBC on WNYC. On the next Brian Lara Show, here a breakdown of the New York primary results and what each candidate is up against in the next round of primaries early next week. Plus, a Syrian human rights activist offers an on-the-ground perspective of the crisis there. It's coming up in about 10 minutes after the BBC. And a little later, on the Leonard Lopate Show, StoryCorps founder Dave Isay takes calls from listeners who have found their path in life doing what they love, and those who have stumbled along the way. Plus, in the latest installment of the Leonard Lopate Show Book Club, Ann Goldstein talks about translating Elena Ferrante's Neapolitan novels into English. It's coming up today at noon.
WNYC support comes from Penguin Books, publisher of Read Jane by Patricia Park, a contemporary Korean-American retelling of Jane Eyre, which follows Jane Rhee as she discovers a new life, love, and who she really is. Available wherever books are sold. Activio, big data software designed to expedite anti-money laundering investigations, automatically combining information from all relevant sources into comprehensive summaries for investigators. Learn more at activio.com/AML.
It'll be a very nice spring day today. Sunny skies, getting up into the mid-60s, and then tonight remains clear with overnight lows near 48. Tomorrow, a little warmer, mostly sunny with a high around 70. And then Friday turns mostly cloudy with some showers likely, mainly in the afternoon. A little warmer still on Friday with highs in the mid-70s. The weekend's looking good with sunny skies both days and highs in the mid to upper 60s. Right now it's 54 degrees and sunny at 9:51.
This is Razia Iqbal with NewsHour from the BBC World Service. On Friday, China will announce details of a future mission to land a probe on Mars, cementing its status as a major player in space. Until now, the country has been secretive about its military-led space programs, but in an exclusive interview with the BBC, the head designer of its lunar and Mars missions says China is starting to open up and reveals the country's plans for future exploration. Our global science correspondent Rebecca Morell reports now from Beijing.
In Beijing Science Museum, space mania has taken over. School children are clambering around life-size space stations, driving miniature rovers, and even taking a spin on a human centrifuge. Why do you like space?
Because it was really fun and cool. The stars is shining. I like the stars. I think it's very, very big in space.
China's recent advances in exploration are clearly capturing the imagination. But for years, the military-led space agency has been shrouded in secrecy. Now, though, it's starting to open up. Wu Weizhen is the chief designer of China's space missions.
The Chinese are quite modest and introverted. Before we accomplish something, we don't talk about it. And afterwards, we don't talk too much either.
But today, Professor Wu is taking a different approach. This is his first interview with a foreign journalist. And he tells me that China has set its sights on Mars.
The US, Europe, and India have all sent probes to Mars. We could have started our Mars probe earlier, but finally the country has given its approval. And we plan to orbit, land, and then send out a rover, all in one mission.
But it was an earlier launch that established China as a global space power. In 2013, China blasted off for the moon and became the first country to land a probe there for nearly 40 years. Now, China's space agency is also heading back to the lunar surface, but this time to a place no one's been before.
Humans are very curious about the dark side of the moon. It's quite challenging to land in this area, but according to research, there might be water or ice because of the lack of sunlight. So we would like to check it out very much.
We left him behind. Let's go get our boy. This is something NASA rejected, so we're talking mutiny.
In the recent Hollywood blockbuster, The Martian, the Chinese were portrayed as the heroes of the space world, lending other countries a helping hand. But in real life, things aren't so clear-cut, especially with the US. Because China's space agency is military-led, America won't work with it for fears that sharing technology could breach its national security.
Would you like to see NASA's restrictions removed so you could work with them on future missions?
We wish that we could cooperate with the US, especially in terms of space and moon exploration. We would welcome this very much. We have urged the US many times to get rid of the restrictions to enable scientists, engineers, and technicians from both countries to work together on exploration.
But this international friction isn't putting Professor Wu off. With plans for Mars, the Moon, as well as 20 other missions due to launch this year alone, China's ambitions for space continue to grow.
That was Rebecca Morel reporting from Beijing. Well, in the last few minutes of our programme, we can bring you some news which has broken while we've been on air. The mass murderer, Anders Behring Breivik, has been partly successful in his court case against the Norwegian state. He maintains he was the victim of human rights abuses in prison. Breivik killed 77 people in the summer of 2011, most of them young political activists attending a youth camp. Joining me now to discuss the ruling, we're joined by freelance journalist Valeria Krishorn. She joins us live from Oslo. Just remind us what the substance of his claim was.
Well, basically, he's claiming that over the near 5 years of his prison stay, he has been subject to inhuman or degrading treatment, and that would be in violation of Article 3 of the European Convention of Human Rights. He's also asked that on Article 8 and complained that he has been not gotten a right to his private and family life. And you're correct in saying he's only partially won, because it's only on Article 3 that he's won in this particular case.
And what are the specifics of that article? What is it that he says has happened to him that he was contesting?
Well, his main complaint is that he has been subject to hundreds of needless strip searches and use of handcuffs, more so than should be required. But he's also complained about little things during the trial. He complained that he had been subject to cold coffee, the same repeated TV dinner. So it's been a mixture of complaints, leading some to believe that this would never even win in the court.
Indeed, I'm sure this has come as a really big surprise to many people. He was also held in. He's also been held in solitary confinement, which is something that he has been contesting. Is it likely that he might appeal against the part that he hasn't won?
Well, interestingly, his lawyer has already gone out and said that they will not appeal against the decision on Article 8, claiming that, well, we really were only after Article 3 and not Article 8. But you might say he's probably cutting his winnings and leaving the table. But this is not necessarily the end of the story, because, of course, there could be an appeal by the government on this, and it remains to see what actions the prison takes to lighten up his sentence in light of this decision.
And what's the reaction been so far in Norway itself?
Well, there actually hasn't been too much yet, but ahead of this decision, it was widely expected that he would not win. There were human rights experts saying that they didn't see enough in this case that it would actually win in the first instance. They were, of course, expecting possible appeals, but in this first ruling, it's come as quite a surprise.
Indeed, I'm sure this is not the last that we'll hear about this. Freelance journalist Valeria Krishon joining us live from Oslo on that story that